Thank you everybody for coming today for our author talk here at the Sister Bay Liberty Grove Library Branch. And today's event is funded by the generous donors of the James P. Jordan Memorial Fund for our branch to help provide programming with authors in particular, as well as support writing workshops, and Gail was part of one of those recently, and the love of reading and engaging with fellow community here in our libraries. Our author today is Roger R.A. Simpson, who grew up in the Chicago area and graduated from Northwestern University and John Marshall Law School. After 47 years, he recently retired from being a criminal trial lawyer in a small town in central Illinois. And The Truth and Hope, right here, this is actually our one of our many library copies that's available in the system, is his first novel. And he's currently working on 2 more. So he'll be talking about that today, but in particular highlighting this first one that takes place in Wisconsin's Northwoods and Chicago. So welcome, Roger. Thanks for having me here. Glad to have you back.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Christina. Last year at this time I gave a presentation and I thanked everyone for coming. It was a beautiful sunny day. And I thought, well, the rain actually might bring more people in, but thank you for braving the rain, which I'm sure is something that is needed here and almost everywhere except in the Northeast where there's been some terrible flooding. A couple of, almost 3 years ago, I discovered 2 things, the combination of which is why I'm here today giving this presentation. The first is that I discovered Door County. I've been vacationing in Wisconsin for over 50 years, but because of things out of my control, our families always went to the Northwoods of Wisconsin, the Rhinelander area, Minocqua, north of Wausau, about 90 miles. A bunch of lakes, okay? 3 years ago, through some incredible coincidences, which I will not go into because it would take a half an hour, I discovered Door County, and I discovered that I had a friend here that lives up in Ellison Bay, or actually he stays here during the summer months. He introduced me to Christina, and we set up a program. The other thing that happened almost at the same time that I discovered Door County is I discovered that I can write. And trust me, I never had, unlike some people who will tell you, oh, I've always wanted to write, just didn't have the time. I never wanted to write. I practiced law for 47 years, had lots of clients, had lots of information in my brain. To relax, I would read the newspaper or magazines, but rarely even read a book, much less considered writing one. So how did it happen? Well, it's funny how things work out and how one thing is consecutive to another, and you look back and you go, okay, so I'm having lunch one day with a friend of mine. We're both huge movie buffs, and he says, I got a great idea for a movie. He explains it, pretty good plot, and I said, for whatever reason, I'll do the screenplay. Now, I'd never done a screenplay either. I don't know what I was thinking of, other than the fact that a movie I can see, so I started doing what's called storyboards. In fact, this just happened to be in my briefcase. And it's interesting to me. Here's my original storyboards. Water aerial view, slowly moving east across Lake Michigan, coming onto the loop during Christmas. Then I shift and blah, blah, blah. So about the 12th storyboard, seriously and literally something clicked. And I just started writing. I can't explain it. I don't really want to explain it. It happened, and things came gushing out of me, and I couldn't write fast enough on my computer. It's interesting, yesterday I was in Sturgeon Bay. There's a very nice bookstore there on 3rd Avenue, Novel Bay Booksellers. wonderful little place. And a gal came in there, she's from Evanston. She noticed that I went to Northwestern, which is in Evanston, Illinois. And I told her that story that I just told you. And she said, he was in there all the time. It just came out. That's as good an explanation as I can give. And actually, it was rather touching when she told her. She said, no, he was in you the whole time. So I started writing. My partner in life, whose name is Kelly, bought me a book by Stephen King, an author whom I've never read. His books are too long. 400 pages is about my limit. But this book was quite good. It was called On Writing. And he had some very basic tenets. The first was, if you want to write, you better start reading. So I started reading about 1 or 2 books a week. I'm a big fiction reader. For whatever reason, I like English authors. I like Kenneth Follett and Frederick Forsyth and Jeffrey Archer. But I've also read, my favorite American authors are Kristen Hanna and Anthony Doerr. They've both written amazing World War II books. He also said, write what you know. Write what you know. Don't make stuff up pretending that you know something when you don't. You won't fool the reader. Write what you know. And write the truth. Write the truth. Don't make 2 + 2 = 5. It equals 4. Don't try to distort the facts. So my book is one of fiction, but there are truisms within fiction. There are characters that have certain traits. There are systems that are discussed. There's behaviors that are discussed. As was observed earlier before my remarks, the name of the book is The Truth and Hope. I struggled with the title of this book. No one else could think of anything better. It sounds like some sort of self-help book. It's not. It's a novel. It's a murder mystery. But if you were to search for it on Amazon, I don't like Amazon. It'll come up with a bunch of self-help books. You know, Hope is a character in the book, and she has to testify. She's a young girl. She's victimized sexually by a voice teacher, and she has to testify. So the truth and hope is reflective of what she does in the story. At the top, it is illustrated with the Northwoods, and people who buy it never even notice. If you turn it over, the other half is the Chicago skyline. So this points out both settings in the book. As Christina indicated, I grew up in Chicago. I went to high school there, I went to undergraduate school, and I went to law school in Chicago. And I love the city. I think it's an amazing city. And I discussed that. One of the characters in the book moves to Chicago, and he describes it. It gives him protection, gives him kind of some, he's concealed there. His past isn't visible. And for that reason and others, he likes it. It has its flaws, obviously, but if you know this city, there's just a wealth of things to do and to learn. So I chose my settings in places that I knew. I've been vacationing in the Northwoods since I was 19 years old. Still just was there for a week 2 days ago. My son is actually the director of a boys camp in Minocqua. And so I still go there, so I know it. I know the culture. I know the the little nuances of the Northwoods. It comes out like in the first chapter. When I first went up there, and they have them here too, the arrows out in the country where, you know, there's like 6 arrows, some are pointing this way, some are pointing that way, and you're looking for something and it's raining out, and it's just frustrating, but it's part of the landscape. The murder actually occurs right at the beginning. So I'm not disclosing anything. If you were to read the back of the paperback copy, it depicts that slaying. And that's the middle of the story. It then goes back about 5 years and narrates to that point. And the second half is the investigation of the murder. So I don't do this for a living. It's a good thing for me. I do it because I like to do it. I have no pressure in doing it. I write when I want to write. But once I knew that I could put words to paper, and I was in the middle of this book. Everybody know what a streak hitter is in baseball? That's me. I'm a streak writer. Boy, when I'm ready, it's all day with a typewriter. In writer's terms, they talk about words. How many words do you get down? John Grisham, who's writing, I really respect. It's very easy to read. He's contracted to do a book a year with his publisher. He writes his book the first 6 months of the year. He only writes 500 words a day, but he does it every day. He does it in the morning. 500 words is probably 100 pages. And I had days where I was really going, I'd get up, I'd get coffee, I wouldn't even change or shower or anything. I'd go right to my computer and I'd write solid for 8 hours. 5,000 was my record, 5,000 words in one day. That's where editing comes in, because I have no idea what it's like. It's coming and writing, and we have to obviously edit. Let's see. By the way, if you have any questions along the way, shoot up your hand. This is, I don't mind interruptions, quite frankly. I enjoy it more than listening to my own voice all the time. Yes, sir.
I'll ask a question. You say you sit down and you write maybe several thousand words. Do you have an outline that you go by, or are you what they call a pantser? You just
I'm a pantser.
You just wing it.
Here's what I do, and I see it. At the beginning of this, the opening chapter is a scene at a lake in a remote cabin in northern Wisconsin. Something I've sat by for hours, alone. Ice is the water is just glass. It's calm. There's no interference. And so I describe that. Then there's a cabin, or someone in the cabin that comes out, and you can see him come out. So I basically write what I'm seeing, which is kind of like a movie. It's a movie in my head. And I don't know I didn't know where I was going. I changed a lot of things. I don't want to spoil it in the event that you read this book, but there are some major changes I made right at the end. One thing I do after I have written a day's work, the next day or the next time, whenever that may be, because I'm not a regimented person. certainly not a regimented writer. So it could be 2 days, it could be a week. I will read what I wrote previously, and I read it out loud so that I can hear, because it's different when you read something out loud than when you read it to yourself. And I did that on this book towards the end, and I'm really glad I did. You know what rifling is, where you can get a slug and you can compare whether it came out of a certain rifle, because it makes very distinct, unique markings on the barrel. Well, at the beginning of the story, the shooting was with a shotgun slug, and they don't do rifles. I'm no gun, but I read it to a friend of mine who's a deer hunter. He says, Roger, that's no good. You can't get rifling out of a shotgun. I said, okay. So I changed it to a rifle. Then I had to go back throughout the entire story every time I mentioned the weapon, and make sure that everything jived together. From a personal standpoint, when I was a student, and this has been something that I still haven't overcome, I was a procrastinator, especially when it came to writing. And so as a result, my first draft ended up being my last draft. So I had to make sure it was, acceptable. And when I write now, at times I'm stalled because I'm thinking, this has got to be the final draft. It's got to be perfect. Big mistake. Just get it down. You can always come back. Get the idea down. It's really taught me that the lesson that when you review something, you can always make it better. Or someone else reviews it. When I was preparing for trial, didn't matter whether I was defending or prosecuting, I did both. I discovered that there's always one more thing you can do, at least one, maybe more. And I always thought, oh my gosh, is my opponent going through the same thing I am? I don't know, but you just keep digging and analyzing and making sure that you've covered as many bases as possible. Because things can come up during the middle of the trial, totally unexpected, and you have to be prepared for them. So with my writing, I'll go back and I'll either change the idea that I'm trying to get across, or I'm changing the way in which I present the idea. Funny story happened. I have an older brother who's 5 years older, much brighter than I am, much more well-read. Was a journalism major. He went to Northwestern too. So he's a journalism major. Used to own a small town newspaper, like a town similar to Sister Bay in Canada. So I thought, okay, I'll send my manuscript to my brother and he can check it out. So he does, and he gets back to me and he says, I was gonna tell you, don't quit your day job, but I'm not going to. He said, your storytelling's really good. He says, your writing's horrible. But your ability to tell a story is fine. And so I said, okay. He said, do you want me to, maybe kind of do some editing for you? Sure. A month later, he sends me like the first 5 chapters. And I have my manuscript and I have his edited manuscript. And I got really hot. It was changed. He changed it. And it dawned on me that he's an editor of nonfiction. He wants to make sure the newspaper clearly presents a story. I said, Craig, this is mine. This is stylistic. Get out of here. So I had to fire him. He did give me some good suggestions about moving parts of the novel around it. And he was living out in Connecticut at the time, and he has a neighbor who used to be an editor for one of the publishing Big Five in New York City. He said, I'll just mention to her that, you're writing this book and see if she wants to maybe help you out with the editing. So he did, and she declined. She says, I did nonfiction and retired. I really don't want to do it. But by the way, is he through with his book? He said, yeah, he's through with it. And she said, well, you tell him the fun is over. Writing it is the fun part. Selling it is the hard part. Which leads me into the subject of publishing. So I never knew I'm going to write a book, so I write it. Now what do? Well, you got to get it put into a readable form. Stephen King's book was written in 1999, and he said, get an agent. Don't try to do this yourself. May have been good advice in 1999. It wasn't good advice for me because, first of all the agents are in New York. There's one agent in Chicago. I wrote that firm a letter. They call it a query letter. It's got to be as short as possible. Somehow you've written a novel of 90,000 words, and yet the letter to your agent has to be less than 100, and you're supposed to convince them that they should take your book. I think the whole process is stupid. But anyway, I wrote it to her, and I got an automatic response, and then I got nothing. I said, okay. So then I investigated self-publishing. Now, I'd say 25 years ago, self-publishing was, and still is in some circles, I'm sure Manhattan would be one of them, was really frowned upon. But it has become an incredibly huge industry. Profitable, and I think necessary for writers who have no other real opportunity to get their writing out except through paying to get their own book published. If I'd had to wait to get my book published, I probably, it'd have been a year before I got an agent. The agent probably would have taken another year to find a publisher and another 18 months to get it on the shelves. And my return would have been 15%. I own this. I don't know what it's worth. Quite frankly, I think it would make a great movie since I wrote it as a movie with two really neat settings, the Northwoods and the city of Chicago. But we'll see. If someone comes along and says, I agree, it's mine. It's not Simon & Schuster's or Penguin's or one of the others. And by the way, when they buy your book and promise to pay you 15% of sales, they can change it. They own it. So this wasn't a money maker for me. This was just something that kind of came about, and I thought, all right, I'm gonna write a book. And that's what my brother Craig said. You're doing this, just kind of do it, aren't you? I said, yeah, I am. So I had trouble finishing this book. So I started another one before I finished this one. And it's about 80% done. And I've also started two others, actually. Christina only knew about one of them. I've started another murder mystery. I've also started something that's going to be the Confessions of a Small Town Lawyer. And that's really easy. And I think it's funny, and I think it'll be fun to write. So publishing it's a tough business because I've been, I think, fairly successful for a self-published author. But this book doesn't get sold unless I put the energy behind it. Coming here, going to Sturgeon Bay tomorrow. I'm going to Appleton, Wisconsin. There's a bookstore there, but it's fun. It's fun. I get to come to Door County. I get to go to the Northwoods, and Wisconsin's been wonderful in purchasing this book. Chicago, I haven't really been able to puncture it. I'm not sure why. I guess it's just too big. But people up here are really proud of their state, as they should be. I think there's just, I'm from Wisconsin. That means something. And it does. It does. I think that's what they like. Let me see if my notes have been covered. Any more questions?
How long did it take you to write your first book?
It didn't take me very long at all to write the first draft. And really, the first draft wasn't changed that much. Somewhere between 6 months and 9 months.
That's fast.
It's very fast. Very fast. The second one, and I may read an excerpt from the second one. Or I'll tell you what, let me read an excerpt from The Truth and Hope, and I will read that part which is relevant to the title. Actually, I have it marked over here. Hope is a young girl that lives in the city. She's about 10 years old. She has an incredible singing voice. Her parents they're middle class, but they have trouble. They're going to have trouble getting her the help that she needs to augment her voice. But they do it anyway. They go to this fictional Chicago Institute of Music, and there is a voice instructor that is assigned to her. And he abuses her. He fondles her. It's a fondling case. I handled many of these types of cases when I was an attorney. They're extremely painful, whether you're prosecuting or defending. In fact, my introduction to Door County came about as a result of a seminar that was given by a Milwaukee prosecutor by the name of Charles Judson, who has had speaking engagements here. He spends I think I mentioned this earlier, his summers up at Ellison Bay. And he was a camper when he was a kid at the camp that my son is now the director of. And that's how we met. My son told me about this guy, and I said, that rings a bell, because I was really impressed with his seminar. And I called him, hadn't talked to him or seen him in 33 years. He said, yeah, I was in Chicago. So we hooked up, and it's been a wonderful friendship. That is how I came to be here. But he wrote a book about children in the courtroom and how we really we treat them like adults. And it's horrible. And so I went to a seminar. I had a number of cases. I don't know how many. Way too many. And this is all fictionalized, but the pressure, the pain to a victim, to the victim's family is sometimes, the abuse is never revealed. It causes pain the entire life. In any event, Hope, the Truth and Hope. She's taking the stand. The meat of Hope's testimony obviously was her recounting of the acts of violation, his unwanted kissing and fondling. Prior to her testimony in this regard, Ms. Dunning, who's the prosecutor, asked her to describe what had happened for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury. This was a cue. Hope paused and moved about a quarter turn in her witness chair so that she had full view of each juror. She took a full breath and held eye contact with key members of the jury, a tactic previously discussed with the veteran prosecutor. Her testimony rang true. Her voice cracked with emotion at one point when she recounted the first kiss on her neck. It was real. She composed herself, took another deep breath, and continued. It enhanced her believability as a witness. Some jurors were literally on the edges of their seats. Her eyes penetrated the eyes of the people who would assess her story. She was believed. The truth was in her. By design, the veteran prosecutor did not inquire of Hope as to the many lies she had told in an effort to conceal her abuse. She banked on defense counsel to do so. It was all part of the chess game strategy that trial lawyers engage in. The defense attorney, whose name was Quinn Cooper, did not disappoint. Through the discovery process and his own extensive investigation, Cooper had compiled a list of individuals who had questioned Hope about what was wrong. Why had she become so withdrawn, so quiet, so sad, so not Hope? Every encounter, when asked, Hope had given essentially the same answer: nothing, a lie. So the parade of questions began. Actually, there was just one question that was used to apply to everyone to whom Hope had told the same lie: parents, teachers, school counselors, friends, parents of friends, fill in the blank. You lied to all of them. And with respect to each question, Hope responded in the same way, with calm and resolve. Yes, I lied. And yet, after all those past lies, the veteran defense counsel asked, you expect this jury to believe you today? Yes, of course I do, because it is the truth. Prosecutor Dunning asked one question on redirect examination. Why, Hope? Why did you lie to all those people? Once again, Hope turned and spoke directly to the jurors. They were waiting for an explanation. I'm sure attorney Mr. Quinn was not sexually molested as a child, because if he had been, he would know the answer to his questions about why I lied. When Mr. Wilkerson, who's the defendant, perpetrator, the man sitting over there, kissed me and touched my breast, I felt something that I had never felt before. I had trusted him. I really liked him a lot. He was helping me with my singing. I thought he liked me. And then this happened. I felt dirty, confused, ugly. I'm only 11 years old, 10 when this happened. Why did he do this? I blamed myself. It was not easy to lie, but telling the truth was impossible. Every time I was asked what was wrong, my heart raced, my body shook, and I got dizzy. Saying nothing was the quickest way to end the misery. I've only begun to heal. I relive this every day. I have horrible nightmares, a lot of them. It's with me everywhere. Sometimes on the radio, I hear a song that he helped me sing. I burst into tears when that happens. My life is often very dark, like I'm swimming in mud. You could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. Every word sunk in with the jury. They could not hide their empathy for the young girl facing them. Two of the women wiped away tears. Many of the jurors were nodding their respective heads, signaling not only their belief, but their support for this courageous young girl. Judge Taylor broke the silence, turned to defense counsel, and asked, any recross, counsel? No further questions, Your Honor. So that's the truth and hope. And if there's any more questions, I would be more than glad to field them, either about the writing process. By the way, the writing process, I think, is really particular to every individual. If I had to write for a living, I'd develop a different way of doing it. I'd get things done. Right now I do it because it's a hobby and it's an activity for my retirement. So that's the end, unless there's questions. Thank you for coming.